My name is Tara Henderson. I am 32 years old. I am an architect at a mid-size firm in Scottsdale, Arizona, where I design commercial and residential structures. I think for a living about how things are built, about load and structure, and the relationship between the parts of a system and the whole it produces. I think about what a building needs to do and what it needs to look like, and how those two requirements are sometimes aligned and sometimes in tension, and I find ways to make them work together. I am good at identifying what something is actually for versus what it looks like on the surface. I am telling you this because understanding what Renee Henderson does requires understanding the difference between what it looks like on the surface and what it is actually for. On the surface, what she does looks like love. What it is actually for is something else entirely. My husband David and I have been married for 4 years. We are fine. We were fine on the Saturday in April when my cousin-in-law Lisa's baby shower was held at a restaurant in Scottsdale. We were fine the week before the shower and the week after the shower and every week before and after that. We have no problems I am not aware of. I am the person inside the marriage. I would know. Renee Henderson is David's older sister. She is 37 years old, and she loves David with the specific, possessive love of an older sister who has decided that being close to her brother is a significant part of her identity. She is not a bad person. She is a person with a specific behavior pattern that produces a specific effect, and the specific effect of that behavior pattern is that Renee becomes the person everyone calls when there is a problem, real or invented. On the Saturday in April, Renee stood up at a table of 12 women at Lisa's baby shower, and in the middle of a toast, told 12 of David's female relatives that David and I were going through a rough time and asked for their prayers. There was no rough time. She invented a rough time so that she could ask for prayers for it, because asking for prayers positions you as the person who knew about the rough time first, the person closest to the situation, the person whose love is strong enough to bring the family together in support. She created the crisis so she could be the one everyone called. That is the blueprint. That is what the structure was actually for. And the reason I understand the blueprint so clearly is because what Renee did at the baby shower was not new. It was the most visible instance of a pattern I had been watching, up close, and with the full attention of a woman who thinks for a living about how structures work, for 4 years of marriage and 2 years of dating before that. David Henderson is 35 years old. He is a software engineer at a tech company in Tempe, Arizona, and he is, I want to give you this fully because it is relevant to the story, a genuinely good person in the specific way of people who are warm by nature and who were raised in a family that valued warmth as a fundamental orientation toward the world. He is the kind of person who remembers the names of your colleagues and your friends and asks about them by name months after you mention them. He apologizes when he is wrong with the ease of someone who does not experience apology as a threat. He is funny in the specific way of someone who is paying attention to the world and finds it genuinely interesting. He is also, and this is the element of his character that is most relevant to the Renee situation, someone who grew up believing that the way you handled family problems was by not naming them. His family was warm and loving, and also had a long-established culture of conflict avoidance that was so normalized that he did not fully see it until he was an adult in a relationship with someone who came from a different culture. My family named things. His family navigated around things. Both approaches have their strengths. The gap between them produced some of the more interesting conversations of our first 2 years together. The Henderson family consists of David's parents, Robert and Diane, who have been married for 40 years and live in Mesa, Arizona, where Robert recently retired from a career in banking and Diane continues to work part-time as a bookkeeper. David's sister Renee, 37, who lives in Scottsdale and works as a dental office manager, and an extended network of aunts and cousins and family friends who constitute a large and connected Henderson social universe. The Hendersons are church people and neighborhood people, and the kind of family that shows up for each other consistently and with warmth. They were, on the whole, warm to me from the beginning. Robert Henderson, David's father, had the ease of a man who was happy his son had found someone, and expressed this with straightforward warmth from our first meeting. Diane Henderson was warm in the measured way of a woman who loves her children, and was waiting to understand me fully before expressing that love, which I respected, and which arrived in full over the first year of David and me being together. And then there was Renee. Renee was warm to me too. This is important to say clearly because the story I am about to tell could be misread as the story of a cold or hostile sister-in-law, and Renee is neither of those things. She was warm. She included me in family gatherings with genuine-seeming enthusiasm. She texted me occasionally, links to things she thought I might like, questions about my work, the kind of low-stakes digital connection that family members maintain to signal that they are thinking of you. She was friendly. She was also, from early in my relationship with David, extremely interested in his inner life in a way that was slightly more intense than you would expect from a sister who was 4 years older and had her own full life. She asked him questions about our relationship in the specific way of someone who is gathering information rather than simply staying connected. She offered advice, unprompted, about things within our relationship that David had mentioned to her and that she had developed opinions about without being involved. She was the person David called first with news, not because she was the closest to him geographically or historically, but because she had, through sustained effort, made herself the person he called first. I noticed this from early on. I noticed it without yet having a name for it. I filed it in the category of things I was watching rather than things I was acting on, because you do not act on a feeling about your partner's sister based on 2 months of observation. You watch. You see what the pattern says over time. And the pattern, over 4 years of marriage and 2 years before that, said exactly what the baby shower confirmed. Renee Henderson is 37 years old. She has never been married, though she has been in several long-term relationships, the most recent of which ended about a year before the baby shower. She is competent and organized and funny in the quick, social way that makes you like her immediately and stay liking her, because the quickness is also accompanied by warmth. She is, I want to say this genuinely, someone I would likely enjoy if the specific dynamic I am about to describe did not exist. The dynamic is this: Renee has built her identity in her family around being the person closest to David. Not closest in the familial sense, they are siblings, the closeness is given. Closest in the emotional access sense. The person David turns to, the person who understands him best, the person who is most necessary to him. This is a role she has been building for 35 years, since the day David was born and she became his older sister. And in the years before David met me, it was a role she held uncontested. I am not suggesting she decided to resent me the moment I arrived. I do not think it was that clean or that conscious. What I think is that my arrival in David's life created a structural change in the role she had always occupied, and that structural change produced, in her, a response that was not calculated malice, but was also not unconscious. It was somewhere in the middle. The specific behavior of a person who is threatened without fully acknowledging the threat, and who has developed, over years of being good at managing family relationships, a repertoire of techniques for maintaining their position. The technique she uses most consistently, the concerned announcement. This is the technique of sharing information about someone else's life in the framing of care, as a prayer request, as a worried observation, as something she felt the family should know because she cared so much about everyone involved. The concerned announcement positions Renee as the person who knows things the family needs to know, which positions her as the person who is closest to the situation, which positions her as the person who should be contacted when things develop. I had seen this technique before the baby shower. I had seen it in smaller, less dramatic forms over the 4 years of our marriage, and I had watched how it worked. Renee would share something about David, a work stress he had mentioned to her, a conversation they had had that she characterized as David being worried about something, in a way that felt like caring family communication, and that also, subtly, established Renee as the person who knew. Family members would then contact David about whatever Renee had shared. David would respond, slightly confused about how they had known, and Renee would get another small accretion of the position she was maintaining. I had said this to David. Once, explicitly, about a year into our marriage, I said, I noticed that Renee shares things about you with the family in a way that creates concern and then positions her as the one managing the concern. Have you noticed that? He said he had not noticed it specifically, but he could see what I was describing. He said he would pay attention. He paid attention. He saw it, over the following years, in the specific instances as they occurred. He had not yet done anything about it, because the doing something about it required a confrontation with his sister that sat in the category of things his family did not do. The baby shower moved it to a category that required action. Because the baby shower was not a small instance of the technique, it was the largest, most visible, most undeniable instance. It was not sharing a real thing that David had mentioned in a way that created unnecessary concern. It was inventing a crisis wholesale, a rough time that did not exist, and announcing it to 12 women as a prayer request. It was using the specific credibility of the concerned sister framing to create a narrative about David's marriage that was factually false. When David heard what Renee had said at the baby shower, and I will tell you how and when he heard it, his response was not measured patience. It was the first time I had seen David genuinely angry about something his sister had done. And the anger was not performed for me. It was the anger of a man who had finally seen the full structure of a thing and understood, for the first time with complete clarity, what it was for. I want to tell you about our marriage before I tell you about the baby shower, because the baby shower was built on a lie about our marriage, and I want the truth of the marriage to be visible before the lie is. David and I met at an architecture conference in Phoenix. He was there with a colleague who was presenting a paper, and he had come along because the hotel had a good pool and he had 2 days free. I was presenting a project. We met at the welcome reception and talked for 2 hours about what architects think software engineers get wrong about spatial design, which turned out to be a topic that had more to say than either of us expected. He called me 2 days later. We went to dinner. By the 3rd month, I had a strong suspicion, and by the 6th month, I was certain. We are well matched in the specific way of people who are different in style and similar in values. David is warm and social and extracts energy from people. I am more measured and focused and need solo time to refuel. This is a combination that works better than you might expect. He pulls us into the world, and I create the space that makes the world manageable. We have not had to negotiate about this, because we figured it out early, and we like each other enough that the negotiation was mostly natural. We have disagreements. Every marriage has disagreements. Ours are about things that are ours. How to balance our social schedules, whether the kitchen needs to be organized my way or a way that is more accessible for someone who cooks differently than I do, whether driving to see his parents every other Sunday is the right frequency or slightly too frequent. Real things, normal things. There is no rough time. I want to give you this in the most specific terms available. In the month before the baby shower, the week before the baby shower, the night before the baby shower, there was nothing in our marriage that an outside observer would describe as a rough time. David and I had just returned from a long weekend in Sedona, where we had celebrated our 3rd anniversary. We were in contract on a house we had been looking for 2 years. We were happy. I do not share this to create a contrast with Renee's announcement, though the contrast is significant. I share it because I want you to understand the specific quality of what it felt like to sit at a table and hear someone announce a crisis in your life that does not exist. Not a distorted version of something real. Not an exaggeration of a genuine concern. An invention. A complete fabrication, presented in the language of care, to 12 people who had no way of knowing it was false. The people at that table, David's aunts, his cousins, family friends who had known him since childhood, were not receiving gossip. They were receiving a prayer request from a concerned sister. They were receiving it in good faith. They were going to file it and think about it, and in some cases act on it, call David, ask how he was doing, mention they had heard things were hard, extend the kind of warmth that families extend when one of their members is struggling. And every one of those calls and conversations was going to be built on a foundation that Renee had invented. Every expression of concern was going to contribute to a narrative. David and Tara are having a rough time. It came from Renee. She asked for prayers. That was not true, and that Renee had constructed specifically to make herself the person who had known first and acted with compassion. That is what the structure was for. And I sat at the table with a glass of sparkling rosé in my hand, and I watched it being built in real time. Lisa Henderson, David's cousin, the woman whose shower it was, is 30 years old and was expecting her first child in June, and the shower in April was the specific kind of event that April in Scottsdale produces. Warm enough for a patio, bright enough for the pale palette of pastel decorations and fresh flowers, the kind of afternoon that has the energy of anticipation and the warmth of gathered women who are collectively excited about something. I like Lisa. This is not a complicated thing. She is warm and funny and has always been genuinely kind to me without the performance quality that kindness sometimes has in families where the new person is being assessed. She had been, over the 4 years of my marriage to David, one of the Henderson family members whose welcome felt completely real. I was glad to be at her shower. There were 12 women at the table, David's aunts Carol and Denise, 3 of David's cousins, Lisa, Melissa, and Amber, 2 of Lisa's friends from work, a woman from their church who had been close to the Henderson family for 20 years, Lisa's mother, Aunt Patricia, and Renee, and me. The shower was lovely in all the ways baby showers in April in Scottsdale can be lovely. The food was good. The games were the kind that are not too embarrassing to play at a restaurant table. The conversation was warm and specific in the way of women who know each other well and are celebrating something real. I was relaxed. I was present. I was looking forward to the rest of the afternoon. The toast happened about an hour in, after the main food and before the cake. Renee had apparently been designated as the toaster, or had designated herself, I am not certain which, and she stood up with her champagne glass and she began. She said lovely things about Lisa. She spoke about the kind of mother Lisa would be, about her warmth and her humor and her capacity for love. She mentioned specific memories, a road trip they had taken as teenagers, a summer at their grandmother's house, the way Lisa had handled a difficult period in her 20s with more grace than anyone else would have managed. It was a good toast. The kind of specific, loving toast that someone gives when they genuinely know the person they are celebrating. And then she said, and I want to ask this table to also keep our dear Tara and David in your thoughts. They have been going through a rough time lately, and I know they would appreciate your love and prayers. She sat down. The table turned, in the gradual, overlapping way of 12 women receiving information that changes the energy of the room, toward me. I was holding my champagne glass. I had not moved. My expression was, by my own assessment, and by the account of the woman sitting to my right, completely frozen. Not crying, not angry, not saying anything, frozen. Lisa, at the head of the table, had an expression that I can only describe as, she did not know, and she now knew, and she was not sure what to do with what she had just witnessed. She looked at me. She looked at Renee. She looked back at me. I said, "Thank you, Renee." I said it because I needed to say something, and that was the thing that would end the tableau and allow the shower to continue and not make Lisa's event into an incident. It was the 2 words that created the least disruption. I was an architect looking at a structure and deciding how to manage an unstable element without bringing the whole thing down. Work continued. The cake was served. The gifts were opened. I was present and warm and engaged in the way that I needed to be present and warm and engaged for Lisa's sake, because Lisa had nothing to do with what Renee had done, and Lisa's shower was not the place for what I was now carrying. I carried it through the rest of the afternoon, through the drive home, into the specific quiet of the car where I could finally take a breath and think about what had just happened and what I was going to do about it. I want to stay with the toast for a moment, because I think the mechanics of what Renee did deserve to be understood precisely. The toast was, on its surface, a prayer request. Prayer requests exist in a specific social context, particularly in Southern families and church communities, where asking the group to pray for someone is a recognized and accepted form of collective care. A prayer request says, "This person I love is struggling, and I want the community around us to know so that they can hold that person in their love." It is a genuine form of community support. What Renee did with the prayer request form was use it to introduce false information about my marriage into a community context in a way that was protected by the framing. Because the framing was care. You cannot respond to a prayer request with, "That is not true." You cannot stand up at a baby shower table and say, "My sister-in-law just fabricated a crisis in my marriage, and I would like to dispute it in front of the group." That response is worse than the prayer request, in the social logic of that table. It makes you the person who caused a scene at a baby shower. It makes Renee the person who was just trying to help. The structure was designed with this protection built in. The form of the announcement, prayer request, concern, love, made it nearly impossible to contradict in the moment. And because it was nearly impossible to contradict in the moment, it became, in the minds of the 12 women at the table, something that had been said in public without being denied. Which is the social equivalent of truth? I did not know all of this in the moment. I knew it in the way that you know things you have not yet had time to analyze. In the body, as a response, as the specific frozen quality of someone who has registered a significant event before the mind has fully processed what kind of event it is. By the time I was in the car driving home, I had processed it. And what I had processed was this. Renee had stood up at a table of David's family and had made a false statement about our marriage and had framed it as care and had made it impossible to contradict without making me look like the aggressor. She had done this in a room without David, which meant David would hear about it secondhand, filtered through 12 different people, each of whom would carry the impression that David and Tara were having a rough time. The rough time did not exist before the toast. After the toast, it existed in the social reality of the Henderson family, not because it was true, because Renee had said it and the table had heard it and nobody had contradicted it. This is what I mean when I say she created the crisis. She did not find a crisis. She manufactured one and then deployed it in the form most likely to spread and least likely to be challenged. And the manufactured crisis served the purpose that all of Renee's manufactured crises serve. It made her the person who knew, the person who cared enough to say something. The person David would hear about this from, because he would hear about it from Renee, specifically, who would reach out to him with her concern about how I had reacted to her prayer request. She called him the following morning, before I had said anything to him. She called him at 9:15 a.m. on a Sunday, while we were making breakfast, and she said she hoped we were okay, and that she was sorry if the prayer request at the shower had landed wrong, and that she was just so worried about us, and she hoped I was not upset. She framed the call as a check-in about my reaction. She knew she had done something. She was managing the aftermath before the full truth of what she had done had been conveyed. The rest of the baby shower was an exercise in social management that I am proud of in the specific way that you are proud of things that required significant effort that was invisible to the people around you. After the toast, after the table had recalibrated and the cake had been served and the energy had normalized to approximately what it had been before, not exactly what it had been, there was a specific change in how some of the women at the table interacted with me, but approximately, the gathering continued. David's Aunt Carol came over to me while Lisa was opening gifts. She sat down beside me and said, in the quiet way of someone who has something to say that the room does not need to hear, "Are you okay, honey?" She said it with genuine warmth and the specific concern of someone who had just heard that a young woman she liked was struggling. I said, "We are fine, Aunt Carol, really, thank you for asking." I said it clearly and with the warmth that the question deserved from someone who was asking in good faith. I did not say, "Renee made that up." I did not say, "There is no rough time." I said we are fine and I meant it and I let it be that. Cousin Melissa came over about 20 minutes later. She hugged me, she said, I had no idea you all were going through something. I hope things get better soon. I said, thank you, Melissa, we really are okay. She looked slightly confused, in the way of someone who has received two pieces of information that do not quite fit together. She filed it and moved on. This is what the structure of the false prayer request produced. A room of women who now believed, to varying degrees of certainty, that David and Tara were having a rough time. Some of them would call David. Some of them would mention it to their husbands who were David's relatives. Some of them would store it as background information, the kind of family data that shapes future interactions even when it is never explicitly invoked. The prayer request had seeded false information into the Henderson family network, and the seeds would grow. Lisa found me as I was getting ready to leave. She hugged me and said very quietly, I am so sorry. I had no idea she was going to say that. I had no idea and I am so sorry it happened at my shower. She was genuinely upset. I told her it was not her event to apologize for, that it was beautiful and she was going to be a wonderful mother and I loved her. She held on for an extra beat. She knew something had happened that should not have happened. I drove home alone. David was not at the shower. It was a women's event, and I thought about what I was going to say when I got there. And then Renee called David at 9:15 the next morning and told him she was worried about how I had reacted to her prayer request. And the thing I had been planning to tell him in my own words, in my own time, became something I needed to tell him immediately because he was already holding Renee's version of it. I drove home from the shower on the I-101 with the windows cracked and the radio off, which is what I do when I need to think. I had been in the room for 4 hours. I had managed my expression and my interactions and my responses to Aunt Carol and Melissa and everyone else who had been kind to me in the specific way that people are kind when they believe you are struggling. I had held it together for Lisa's sake and for David's family's sake, and because creating a scene at a baby shower was not something I was willing to do regardless of what Renee had done. Now I was in the car. I had the 45-minute drive from the restaurant in North Scottsdale back to our apartment in South Scottsdale. I thought. The first thing I thought about was what I knew versus what I inferred. What I knew, Renee had stood up at a table of 12 women and had stated as a prayer request that David and I were going through a rough time. What I inferred, this was consistent with a pattern I had been observing for years, the concerned announcement pattern, and was the most significant and undeniable instance of it. What I knew, there was no rough time. What I inferred, the prayer request was not an expression of genuine concern, but a mechanism for positioning. The second thing I thought about was what I wanted to happen. This is the design question, translated into relational terms. What is this structure actually for, and what do I want the outcome to be? I did not want Renee expelled from the family. I did not want a war. I did not want David to have to choose between his sister and his wife, because I was not willing to create that binary. What I wanted was for the false information to be corrected, and for the pattern to be interrupted. For Renee to understand that what she had done was visible, specifically visible to me and to David, and that it would not continue without consequence. The third thing I thought about was David. Specifically, how to tell him. The question of what to tell your partner about something a family member did is a specific kind of question that sits at the intersection of marriage and family, and the answer is almost always, tell the truth in full without adding commentary on what the truth means. Give the information. Let them draw the conclusions. David knew his sister better than I did and would arrive at the correct conclusions without my editorial assistance. The fourth thing I thought about was timing. Renee had not yet, to my knowledge, told David anything. If I got home and told David first, he would have the accurate version before Renee had the opportunity to provide the managed version. This mattered. I pulled into our parking garage at 6:15 p.m. David was inside making dinner. I came in, I set my bag down, I sat at the kitchen counter while he was at the stove, and I said, I need to tell you what happened at the shower today. He turned around. He looked at my face. He said, okay. He turned the stove off. I told him, I told him exactly what had happened in the sequence it had happened without editorial or interpretation. I described the toast. I described what Renee had said. I described the room's response. I described Aunt Carol and Melissa coming over to me. I told him everything I had observed and nothing I had inferred. I gave him the data and I waited. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "She told 12 people we were having a rough time." I said yes. He said, "Were we?" I said, "What do you think?" He said, "No." I said, "No." He nodded. He turned the stove back on. He said, "I am going to call her." He did not call her that night. He slept on it, which I knew he needed to do, because David at his best is a man who thinks before he acts, and acting on the freshest version of his anger would not produce the conversation he needed to have. He went to sleep. I knew from the way he was lying there that he was not asleep, but he was processing. The next morning, the Sunday morning when Renee called at 9:15, we were making breakfast. I was cutting fruit, he was making eggs, and his phone rang and he looked at it and said, "It is Renee." He showed me the screen, not because he needed my permission to answer but because he was telling me, "This is already happening." I said, "Answer it." He answered it. I heard his half of the conversation. He said hello. He said yes, he had heard. He said he was not worried about Tara being upset. He said he wanted to talk. He made plans to see her, not on the phone, in person, that afternoon. He drove to her apartment in Scottsdale. He was gone for 2 hours and 15 minutes. When he came back, he sat down on the couch and he said, "I want to tell you what happened." I said, "Tell me." He told me that he had gone to Renee's apartment and had sat down with her and had said, directly, "I need to understand why you told 12 people at Lisa's shower that my marriage was in trouble when it is not." He said she had responded by saying she had been concerned about them as a couple and had wanted the family to know so they could support us. He said he had told her, "There is nothing to be concerned about and nothing to support. We are fine." He said she had picked up on some tension. He had said, "There is no tension." He had said, "You told 12 people something that is not true." He had said, "I need you to understand that what you said damaged Tara's relationship with family members who now believe a false thing, and that when you damage my wife's relationship with my family, you are damaging my relationship with my family." He said she had gotten defensive. He said she had only been trying to help, that she was worried about him, that she felt like she had lost closeness with him since he got married, and she had just wanted the family to know they should be paying attention. And that was when he had said the thing that had shifted the conversation. He said he had told her, "Losing closeness is not something you manage by creating crises. It is something you address by talking to me directly. If you feel like you have lost closeness with me since I got married, you tell me that. You do not invent a problem in my marriage to bring the family's attention there." She had not responded to that immediately. She had been quiet, and then she had said, "I know." He said those were the two most significant words of the conversation. Not a defense, not a denial, "I know." The same two words Brittany had said at the kitchen table in Nashville when Grace had put the milestone list in front of her. The two words that mean, "I have understood what I was doing more clearly than I had allowed myself to acknowledge, and you have named it out loud, and I can no longer pretend I was not doing it." He said, "I know." And David said, "Good." And he came home. I want to tell you about what David said to Renee in more detail, because the specific words matter, and because David arrived at those words without my input, which is part of why they landed the way they did. He told me he had started the conversation by saying, "I am not angry at you for caring. I know you love me, and I know you care about my marriage. What I am asking you to stop doing is expressing that care in ways that cause harm without addressing any real problem." He told her about the pattern, not with a list like Grace had, not with the clinical precision of a librarian or the forensic accuracy of a nurse. He told her in the way of a brother who has been watching something without naming it for years and has finally arrived at the decision to name it. He said he had noticed that she shared things about him with the family in a way that made her the person who knew first and acted with compassion. He said he had not said anything before because the things had been small. He said the baby shower was not small. He told her what the concrete consequences were. The 12 women at the table who now believed his marriage was struggling. The calls he had already received that morning from Aunt Carol and his cousin Melissa, both asking how he was doing, both framing the question in the language of concern for someone going through a hard time. The narrative that was now circulating in the Henderson family network that was false, and that would shape future interactions, and that could not be fully uncirculated, even if Renee told everyone she had misspoken. He told her what he needed from her. He said, "I need you to tell the people who heard the prayer request that you misspoke, that Tara and I are fine and that there was no rough time." He said, "I need you to understand that I will tell you directly if there is ever something in my life that I want the family to know. I do not need you to communicate on my behalf." He said, "If you are feeling less close to me than you were before I got married, I want to hear that from you, in our conversations, directly. I want to be closer to you, but closeness that comes at Tara's expense is not closeness I can have." She cried. He let her. He was not cruel about it, he was not dismissive of the tears. He sat with her and he let her feel what she was feeling. And when she was done crying, she said, "I am going to call the family. I am going to tell them I misspoke." He said, "Thank you." She said, "I am sorry, David. I am genuinely sorry for what I did." He said, "I know you are. I want you to know that sorry is not the end of it. Sorry is the beginning of different. I need the different." He told me all of this at the kitchen table that Sunday evening. He told it to me the way he tells me things, directly, in sequence, without editorial. He gave me the facts and let me respond to them. When he finished, I sat for a moment. Then I said, "You did not need to do that." He said, "Yes, I did." I said, "She is your sister." He said, "You are my wife." Renee called the family. I know this because David told me she had, and because I received a text from his cousin Melissa 3 days after the shower that said, "Hey Tara, Renee told me she misspoke at the shower and that you and David are actually totally fine. I am so relieved. I felt weird asking David about it. Sorry for any awkwardness." I texted back, "No awkwardness at all, we really are great, thank you for the love." I received similar texts from Aunt Carol and from Lisa, both of whom had heard from Renee and were reaching out to close the loop. Lisa's text said, "I am so glad you are both well. I am also sorry that happened at my shower." I told her she had nothing to be sorry for and I meant it. Renee called me 4 days after the shower. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message. She said, "Tara, this is Renee. I know David talked to you about our conversation. I want to say to you directly that I am sorry for what I said at Lisa's shower. There was no rough time and I should not have said there was. I was wrong and I am sorry." She said it clearly and without the defensive packaging that apologies sometimes come in. It was a clean apology. I appreciated it. I called her back 2 days later. We talked for 40 minutes. The conversation was careful and honest in the way of two people who have had something clarified between them and are figuring out what the relationship looks like on the other side of the clarification. We were not warm in the easy, surface way we had been before. We were more honest. The honesty was uncomfortable, and I think it was also what the relationship had been missing. She told me in that call something that I had suspected but had not heard from her directly. She said that she had been struggling since David got married. Not with me specifically, not with resentment toward me exactly, but with the specific adjustment of a sibling who had been the primary person in her brother's emotional life, and who had needed to learn how to hold a different position. She said she had not handled the adjustment well. She said she had been doing the thing David had named, using family communication as a way of maintaining the position that had changed, and that she had known she was doing it without ever examining it clearly enough to stop. I said, "I understand that." And I did. Understanding is not the same as accepting the behavior. Understanding is what allows you to have a relationship with the person after the behavior has been named and addressed. We are not where we were. What we have now is more honest and less easy, and I think, over time, will be more solid for it. The structure was flawed. We are rebuilding with better materials. That is what the work of this looked like, and I am willing to do that work because I believe the structure is worth rebuilding. David and I bought the house. We closed in June, 2 months after the baby shower, and we moved into it on a Saturday in July with the help of a moving company we paid too much for, and that was worth every cent. It is a 3-bedroom craftsman in a neighborhood in Scottsdale that has old trees and wide sidewalks, and the specific quality of a street that has been a street for a long time. Renee came to help on moving day. She arrived early and she brought food and she carried boxes, and she was warm in a way that was different from her previous warmth, less performed, less oriented toward position, more simply present. She and I worked together in the kitchen unpacking boxes for 3 hours, and the conversation was easy and honest, and by the end of it we had arrived at something I will describe as the beginning of something that might be real. She has not done the concerned announcement thing again, not in the 8 months since the baby shower. I am not declaring victory on the basis of 8 months. I am noting that 8 months is evidence that the conversation David had with her produced something. David and I had a conversation about this at some point in the fall, in the specific way that married people have retrospective conversations about significant events that are now in the past. He said, "I should have said something to her sooner." I said, "You said it when you were ready to say it completely, that matters." He said, "I was worried it would push her away." I said, "It brought her closer." He thought about that. He said, "I guess that is what honesty does sometimes." Lisa's baby, a girl named Amara, born in June, with the specific wide-eyed awareness of a newborn who seems to be studying the world for the first time and finding it interesting, is doing beautifully. I held her at a family gathering in September. She looked at me for a long time with the focused attention of a person who does not yet know what politeness is, and was therefore giving me her completely unfiltered assessment. I looked back. We regarded each other. She did not announce that my marriage was in trouble. I appreciated that. I am 32 years old. I am an architect. I think for a living about how things are built and what they are built for and what happens when the form and the function are not aligned. What I keep from this story is the specific clarity of understanding what a structure is for. Not what it looks like. The prayer request looked like concern. Not what it claims to be, it claimed to be care. What it was for was position. What it was built to accomplish was making Renee the person closest to the crisis, which required the crisis to be created. Understanding the function of a structure does not require you to be angry at the structure. It requires you to be honest about it. Renee was not a villain. She was a person who had built a mechanism for maintaining closeness to someone she loved, and the mechanism had a flaw in its design. It required other people's pain as its operating material. Real pain when it existed. Invented pain when it did not. You do not demolish a building because it has a design flaw. You address the flaw, you rebuild the affected section, you test the structure under load to see if the repair holds. That is what David did. That is what Renee is doing. That is what I am watching. What I also keep is David saying, "You are my wife." It was not a declaration. It was not dramatic. He said it simply, in response to my saying he had not needed to do what he did. He said, "You are my wife." And what that sentence meant in context was, the person I have chosen, the person whose standing in my family is my responsibility to protect, the person whose relationship with the people I love is something I will not sacrifice for the management of my family's equilibrium. He had spent 4 years learning how to say that. His family had taught him to navigate around difficult things. Renee's baby shower had finally put a difficult thing in front of him that he could not navigate around. And he did not navigate around it. He walked straight toward it. He sat at his sister's kitchen table, and he said the true thing clearly. She created the crisis, so she could be the one everyone called. He told her so. And then he came home, to me, in the house we bought in June. That is the structure, that is what it was built for, and it is holding. If you stayed until the end, thank you. This story is for everyone who has had a family member use care as a mechanism for control. For everyone who has watched someone manufacture a crisis so they could be the one who managed it. For everyone Who has heard their name used in a prayer request that contained a reality they did not recognize as their own? I want to say one thing directly. When someone uses care as a cover for something else, the antidote is honesty about what the care is actually doing. Not accusation. Not a scene at a baby shower. Honesty, delivered to the person who needs to hear it in private by the person whose relationship with them gives it the most weight. David said the true thing to his sister. He did not do it because I asked him to. He did it because he had finally seen the structure clearly and he was not willing to let it stand. That is what a partner does. That is what it looks like when someone chooses you. Drop your city in the comments. Tell me if you have had a Renee in your family. Tell me what it looked like. I read every single one. Subscribe, hit the bell, share this. More stories coming. I'll see you next time.